Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. This headline comes from the LA Times, and it's titled, "Archaeologists Explore a Rural Field in Kansas and a Lost City Emerges." So there's been a lot of talk for a long time, for 40 plus years, about there being some sort of lost encampment or city or settlement in the Midwest, especially around Kansas, because the main narrative was, or the narrative, prevalent thought was amongst scholars was that before the pre-colonial times of the United States, around maybe 500 years plus or so, they used to think that Kansas was part of a huge plain, the Great Plains, and the only people there who settled that area were nomadic American Indians, the natives, who were just following the buffalo herds, and there were no permanent settlements or anything like that until they started until about plus some odd years ago, when people started constructing buildings and setting the foundations for things. They started finding all kinds of artifacts like spearheads and pottery and all kinds of shards of other things, and it led a lot of people who found those things, and scholars alike, to think, okay, there's probably a town. There probably was a town here. Well, they found not only just a town, but one of the largest settlements, like permanent settlements in America, period, before the United States came about. Let's go through the article here. It's a very interesting story. I love it. So there's a anthropologist and archaeology professor from Wichita State University named Donald Blakesley. This guy's awesome. He's the guy spearheading this, I guess, this not movement, but this idea that they need to rethink the traditional view of the early settlement of the Midwest, and he wants to fill major gaps in American history. So he's the lead guy when it comes to excavating and investigating this place. So it all starts with these translated documents written by Spanish conquistadors over 400 years ago. And when I say they, I mean scholars. It was a really bad translation for a while, until this group at UC Berkeley freshly translated the documents into a better, it was a much better, more clear-cut translation. And then Blakesley got his hands on this, and he figured out that the places that the conquistadors were describing were actually real places around where he was familiar in Kansas. He located the lost city of Etzanoa, that's the name, Etzanoa, home to perhaps 20,000 people between 1450 and 1700. So 20,000 people, that's like the size of a modern, like a humble city here. Like I don't know, I was looking up Laverne, California today, because yesterday there was an earthquake there, and Laverne it's a modern city in the San Gabriel Valley of Southern California, and it's about 30,000 people. So the 20,000 people back then is huge. That's a huge amount of people. Moving on, they lived in thatched, beehive-shaped houses that ran for at least 5 miles along the bluffs and banks of the Walnut and Arkansas rivers. Blakesley says it's the second largest ancient settlement in the country after Cahokia in Illinois, which is marginally bigger. UC Berkeley retranslated the documents in 2013, which were often muddled Spanish accounts of their forays into what is now Kansas. The new versions were more cogent, precise, and vivid. So this caught the attention of Blakesley. And let's talk about the conquistadors for a little bit. So the conquistadors were often associated with Mexico, right? Obviously, Cortez came. He was the first guy. They came in and just took over the Aztecs and spread disease and death everywhere. But they also went up into the continental U.S. too, in the heart of it, actually. And the reason why they did that was for gold, and also to probably religious reasons, to convert a bunch of people, but mainly gold. A guy by the name of Francisco Vasquez de Coronado came to central Kansas in 1541. Okay, this is what I'm all reading now. This is all part of the documents. This is not speculation. This is what the actual conquistadors wrote. Okay, so this is primary. This is what you would call the primary source. Okay, so this is legitimate as it comes. Coronado came to central Kansas in 1541, chasing stories of a fabulously wealthy nobleman who napped beneath trees festooned with tinkling gold bells. He found no gold, but he did find Native Americans in a collection of settlements he dubbed Cuivira. Okay, so this is kind of like, if you guys have heard the story of El Dorado, the lost city of El Dorado, the city of gold, those kind of rumors back then drove a lot of people. It's kind of like the gold rush before the gold rush. They were just going around trying to gather as much information as they could and find as much gold as possible to bring back to Spain. Later on in 1601, Juan de Oñate led about 70 conquistadors from the Spanish colony of New Mexico into south central Kansas in search of Cuivira in the hopes of finding gold, winning converts for the Catholic Church, and extracting tribute for the crown. So he's rolling with a bunch of dudes, 70 deep, and they're just going around trying to take what they can in the name of Spain. Just to fill in some context, New Mexico was like their hub, the hub for the Spaniards. That was their stronghold. So everything that they did whenever they went out on these expeditions, they would do so from leaving New Mexico. According to Spanish records, they ran into a tribe called the Etzanoans, who told them of a large city nearby where a Spaniard was allegedly prisoned. The locals called it Etzanoa. Okay, so the Etzanoans, they told the Spaniards about this place called Etzanoa, who happened to have a Spanish prisoner. Okay, this is the information they were armed with before going in. Just keep that in mind. So the Spaniards, they came closer and closer to finding this place, and then they found a bunch of grouse houses along the bluffs, and then a delegation of Etzanoans bearing round corn cakes, so gifts, met them on the riverbank. They were described as sturdy people with gentle dispositions and stripes tattooed from their eyes to their ears. It was a friendly encounter until the conquistadors decided to take hostages. Yeah, that's usually what happens when you mess with conquistadors. They take hostages, especially if you take one of their own, which is not a good idea. And that prompted the entire city to flee, right? So Oñate's men, they wandered the empty settlement for a few days. They counted 2,000 houses that they saw with their own eyes that held 8 to 10 people each. They saw gardens of pumpkins, corn, and sunflowers between all the homes. So these people, these weren't just makeshift houses. They had like farmland in their yards that they were growing and living off of. This is a whole community of people. And remember, this is important because up until now, a lot of the common thought was that these are just pastoralists, like people following. They're just following the herd. They're nomadic, supposedly. No, these people were settled just like the other people were, people in Europe and stuff. That's when they were ambushed by 1,500 Etzanoans. So they come back in number. Remember, this is only about less than 100 conquistadors with like crappy guns and cannons. The conquistadors battled them with guns and cannons before finally withdrawing back to New Mexico, never to return. They're just like, screw this, we're not coming back. You guys can have whatever Spaniard that you have, which that was just a rumor. That they just went by rumor. There was no fact checking. That Spaniard that they had at Etzanoans had there. Anyway, so here's a picture of the bluffs overlooking the spot where the Etzanoans met with Oñate. Pretty interesting. I mean, 400 plus years is not that long ago, so it probably looked similar to what this looks like now. French explorers arrived 100 years later, didn't find anything. Disease likely wiped out the Etzanoa, leaving it to recede into legend. They've been obscured since then. Nothing is heard from them until recently. So after reading this, Blakesley, he gets the National Park Service to help him, which they used a magnetometer to detect variations in the Earth's magnetic field to find features around town that look like homes, storage pits, and places where fires were started. All right, so the magnetometer is able to do this. That's good to know. Then, relying on descriptions from the conquistadors, Blakesley discovered what he believes was a battle site in an upscale neighborhood of Arkansas City, which is in Kansas. Volunteers using metal detectors found 3 half-inch iron balls under the field. Blakesley said they were 17th century Spanish cartridge shot fired from a cannon. A Spanish horseshoe nail was also found. These are all volunteers, by the way. No one's getting paid here. So this is really interesting that they found all this just through volunteer work. So there's like a huge grassroots movement to really settle this. Because remember, this is Kansas. Especially before the internet, there's not a lot to do in Kansas. So they were looking all over for this stuff. There are arrowheads everywhere. There's all kinds of rumors and everyone had a story of finding some Indian artifact or burial ground or something. All of this lent credibility to the detailed accounts left by the conquistadors. Yeah, why would they lie? This is what helped them keep track of everything. And remember, not everybody was able to write, and not everybody was literate back then. So I don't understand why, if you were to read some of these primary accounts, why you would think they would lie about this. Remember, they're on a mission here. Okay, they don't have time to lie about something like this. It's a great story. He said there's a lost city right under our noses. Then he went to the country club. A different guy, McLeod. This guy, he's 71 years old. He's from the area. He offered a quick tour. He takes the people up to the country club, which is the highest point in the city. And remember, high points of any place were really attractive to the natives back then. They held high points in high regard, and it was very significant for them. Lots of artifacts have been taken from here. And here's the actual map, the modern day map, just to get an idea. It's right north of Oklahoma and the southern part of Kansas, right south of Wichita, Arkansas City. So back in '94, thousands of relics were unearthed during road construction. And then Waldo Weddell in 1959 wrote in his book, Intro to Kansas Archaeology, the valley floor and bluffs here were littered with sherds, flints, and other detritus that went on for miles. Okay, there were 20,000 people living here for over 200 years. Local rancher Jason Smith, 47, said how he had seen collections that would blow your mind. Truckloads of stuff, work stone tools, flints. One guy had 100 boxes at his house. Russell Bishop, 66, worked at the country club as a kid. My boss had an entire basement full of pottery and all kinds of artifacts, he recalled. We'd be out there working and he would recognize a black spot on the ground as an ancient campfire site. He has coffee cans full of arrowheads. He spreads them on the counter. I don't know. I don't think anyone knew how big this all was. I'm glad they're finally getting to the bottom of it. So this has been, as you can see, there are all kinds of accounts of this being a big issue, a local issue that was common knowledge for the people back then. Kansas State archaeologist Robert Horde, okay, this guy, he said that based on the Spanish accounts and the evidence of a large settlement, it's plausible that Blakesley has found Etzanoa. Still, he would like more evidence. Come on, Robert Horde. Are you serious? You need more evidence? Look at all that. You've got a great mix of eyewitness count, people who have found a bunch of stuff, plus the fact that it was written by the conquistadors themselves, and the fact that they found the settlement. Come on, man. What more do you need? That doesn't make... This is what's wrong with like the closed-mindedness of the people who are authorities in the field. They've got to be open-minded about this. There's a lot of evidence here. The early Great Plains had long been imagined as a vast empty space populated by nomadic tribes following buffalo herds. But if Blakesley is right, at least some of the tribes were urban. They built large towns, raised crops, made fine pottery, processed bison on a massive scale, and led a settled existence. There were trade connections all the way to the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan in Mexico. Okay, what more evidence do you need, Robert Horde? If you raise crops and you have pottery right away, you're not walking around all day. And excuse me if I'm getting crazy about this, but there's trade routes to the biggest city ever in ancient times, Tenochtitlan. Come on, man. Like, what more do you need? This was not some remote place. The people traded and lived in huge communities, Blakesley said. Everything we thought we knew turns out to be wrong. I think this needs a place in every school book. Sound familiar? This reminds me of Göbekli Tepe hardcore. And this is in our backyard. This isn't in continental U.S. This is America. And this was all discovered by largely volunteers. No one's getting paid. These are like grad students and people who took a flyer and decided to help out. Robert Horde, you getting paid to sit? Come on, man. Anyway. Blakesley has found archaeological evidence in Rice and McPherson counties for other large settlements extending for miles, which he believes existed around the same time as Etzanoa. Makes sense. If there's one big city, there's usually other cities remote, at least in the remote location, right? Bigger excavation is planned for next summer. Good. Experts believe that Etzanoans were their ancestors. This is the Wichita Nation. So these are actual natives, like the descendants of the natives, and they believe that the Etzanoans were indeed their ancestors. Here's what Gary McAdams says, cultural program planner of the Wichita, with the Wichita Nation. This is what he says. The accounts of Oñate and Coronado have been interpreted for years. We had a suspicion it was settled like this, but now it's starting to be documented, which makes it feel more real. Okay, so these are the purported ancestors, or descendants rather, of the Etzanoans. In the meantime, Etzanoa remains mostly underground or on private land, yet that hasn't deterred interest. We get about 10 calls a day to see the lost city, said Pamela Crane, director of the Convention and Visitors Bureau. The vision is to have a visitor center. The other key is to persuade landowners to allow people onto their property. Yeah, that's going to be the hard part. There are private landowners who are probably sitting on a trove of treasure and artifacts from this time, and that's a tough sell to let people come in and out on your property to take a look. So I don't know how they're gonna get around that, but it'll be, if at least one landowner lets excavations take place, that would be awesome. That would make a huge difference. Just one. This is him with a piece of pottery that this kid in the back found it, and this is Blakesley himself. This is Russell Bishop. He has the arrowheads, the guy that worked at the country club. These are all the arrowheads that he found when he was a kid. That's amazing. Limited tours began last spring, and they focus on the historical and archaeological sites. Town leaders are hoping for a UNESCO World Heritage Site designation. Absolutely, they should do that. This is the definition of World Heritage. How could you bury this and ignore it? This is why science takes forever to get updated. Like you gotta wait for the people. It's hard to say, but you gotta wait for the people to die off. All the closed-minded people in power to die off for the new ideas to come to light. There's a saying for it. I can't think of it right now. Someone's got to take Robert Horde aside and set him straight on this, because this is not enough evidence. Come on, man. There's tons of evidence. And here are the pictures. How are they organized? I mean, here are the questions. How are they organized? How did they farm the bluffs? How did they maximize bison herds? The questions go on and on and on, and that's true. And I think with further excavation and maybe more translated documents, because there are a lot of untranslated documents or poorly translated documents that are just sitting there and no one's there to like work on them. So there will be more information to extract from those things, as well as stuff that's probably still underground. I mean, they found a Spanish horseshoe. I mean, they were riding horses. The Spanish were riding horses back then with guns. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of questions here. What do you guys think? Anybody in America, have you guys found an arrowhead? Have you gone around with a metal detector? If you have, then you probably relate to the story. Anybody from the Midwest that have a personal account, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your take on this. And with that, I'll see you guys tomorrow.